The road stretched endlessly before us, dark and empty, swallowed by the thick winter night. The hum of the engine and the occasional flick of the turn signal were the only sounds breaking the silence. Frank sat behind the wheel, drumming his fingers against the steering wheel in time with the song playing softly from the radio. I had my feet propped up on the dashboard, lazily scrolling through my phone, watching the glow of the screen illuminate my hands in the darkness. We had been driving for hours. A 15-hour trip from Florida to Ohio wasn't easy, especially in the dead of winter. But we had friends and family waiting for us at the other end, and the excitement of the trip had kept us going, at least for the first several hours. Now, exhaustion was creeping in. "We should stop soon," Frank said, his voice rough from hours of talking and singing along to the radio. I nodded, stretching. "Yeah, my legs are cramping. You need gas?" "Nah, just need to stretch and use the bathroom. Maybe grab a snack." I tapped on my phone, looking for the nearest rest stop. There weren't many options this far into the rural stretch of the highway, but eventually, I found one. "There's a place a few miles ahead." "Perfect." We pulled into the rest stop just after 10:30 p.m. It was the emptiest one I had ever seen. A single semi-truck was parked off to the side, its cabin dark, the driver probably asleep. Further down, an old van sat near the vending machines, but there were no signs of movement inside. I shivered as I stepped out of the car. The cold air bit at my skin, making me regret not bringing a heavier jacket. "I'll be quick," Frank said, heading toward the restroom. I leaned against the car, scrolling through my phone, letting the dull glow of the screen keep me company in the eerie silence. A few minutes passed, then 5, then 10. I frowned. Frank was taking longer than usual. I shot him a quick text. "Man, did you fall in? Hurry up." The moment I hit send, I felt it. A presence. Someone was standing near me. I looked up so fast I nearly dropped my phone. A woman stood just a few feet away. I hadn't heard her approach. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, with graying hair tucked beneath a knit hat. Her face was pale, almost gaunt, and her eyes, there was something off about them. Something distant. Something wrong. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. Can I help you?" She took a step closer, and I instinctively stepped back. "Have you seen my son?" she asked. Her voice was oddly calm, almost detached. I blinked. "What? My son?" she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "His name is Abel." I hesitated. No, ma'am. I'm just waiting for my friend." What she said next made my blood run cold. "Oh," she murmured. "Well, if you do see him, be careful. He has a nasty habit of attacking people at this rest stop." I stared at her, my breath caught in my throat. She said it so casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. I opened my mouth to respond. Then I heard it. A scream. It came from the bathroom. "Frank." I didn't think. I just ran. The woman's warning echoed in my head as I sprinted across the empty lot, my heart pounding against my ribs. I shoved the bathroom door open, the fluorescent lights inside flickering weakly. The moment I stepped in, I froze. Frank was backed into a corner, his face pale, his hands up in a defensive posture. And standing in front of him, the tallest, filthiest man I had ever seen. His clothes were tattered and stained. His hair hung in greasy, matted clumps around his face. His eyes were wide, wild, and filled with something I can only describe as madness. But the worst part? He was holding a knife. A long, jagged blade, its dull surface reflecting the weak bathroom light. I felt like I had stepped into a nightmare. Frank caught sight of me and exhaled sharply, his voice shaking. "Dude, help." The man turned to me, his lips curling into a twisted grin. "Don't you know who I am?" he shouted. His voice was ragged, cracked, like he had been screaming for days. "I own this rest stop, and you're ruining it. You're going to pay." Then he charged. Time slowed. I barely had time to react before he was swinging the knife at me, the blade slicing through the air. I jumped back, my heart slamming in my chest. He swiped again, missed. It was like he wasn't even thinking, just lashing out in blind rage. Adrenaline surged through me. The moment he hesitated, I tackled him. We hit the filthy bathroom floor hard. The knife clattered from his grip, skidding across the tiles. Frank didn't waste a second. He lunged, kicking the blade away before grabbing the man's arms. Together, we pinned him down. He thrashed, screaming, spitting, his eyes wild. I had never seen someone so completely unhinged. Then, from the doorway, Police are on their way. I looked up. The woman. She was standing in the entrance, her face blank, her hands calmly folded in front of her. "Abel," she said softly, shaking her head. "You've done it again." The man beneath us, her son, let out an inhuman growl, his entire body shaking with rage. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then flashing lights outside. The police arrived, their heavy boots echoing as they stormed in. Relief crashed over me as officers grabbed Abel, wrestling him into cuffs. Frank and I scrambled back, gasping for air, our limbs aching. One of the officers sighed, rubbing his temple. "Christ." Again. I exchanged a glance with Frank. Again. The cop nodded grimly. "This guy's been arrested multiple times. Threatening people. Yelling at them. Even did time in a psych ward." He shook his head. "Yet somehow, he keeps getting out." I looked at the woman, his mother. She was just standing there, staring at her son with something that almost resembled sadness. Frank and I didn't stick around after that. We got back in the car, our hands still shaking as we sped away. For the rest of the trip, neither of us spoke about what happened. But even now, years later, I still think about that night. I still wonder what would have happened if his mother hadn't warned me. What would have happened if I had ignored Frank's scream? What would have happened if Abel had been just a little faster with that knife? I don't stop at rest stops anymore. And I never will again. Road trips were a staple of my childhood. My family loved the open road, cruising past small towns, stopping at gas stations for snacks, playing old rock music on the stereo as the miles stretched on. My stepdad was the kind of man who prided himself on taking the scenic route. He always said highways were too crowded, too predictable. He liked the old roads, the ones that wound through forgotten towns and places that didn't show up on most maps. This trip was no different. We were headed from Tennessee to Florida. An overnight drive meant to get us to my grandparents' house by morning. My stepdad, my mom, my baby brother, and I were packed into our SUV, surrounded by bags of snacks, suitcases, and a cooler full of drinks. Everything was fine for the first few hours. Then, just before midnight, we pulled off into a small Alabama town for a quick stop. The baby needed a diaper change, and my mom was getting restless in the passenger seat. The town was tiny, one of those places with only a single main road, barely lit by a few flickering streetlights. There was a gas station and an old convenience store with a faded sign, its parking lot almost empty. Almost. As we pulled in, I noticed two other vehicles. One was an old, rusty pickup truck parked near the store entrance. The other was a black SUV with tinted windows, sitting on the far side of the lot, completely still. I watched it carefully as my stepdad parked near the store. Something about it felt wrong. It wasn't just that it was parked there. It was the way it sat in the darkness, its engine still running, like it was waiting. I didn't like it. Neither did my stepdad. "Let's make this quick," he muttered, turning off the engine. Mom climbed out of the car, unbuckling my baby brother from his car seat. She carried him over to a small bench near the store, where she laid him down for a quick diaper change. I stayed inside, scrolling through my phone, but my eyes kept drifting toward the SUV. Then it moved. Slowly. Deliberately. It started circling the parking lot. I nudged my stepdad. "You see that?" He had already noticed. His hand drifted toward the glove compartment, where I knew he kept his gun. The SUV made a slow loop around the lot. It wasn't speeding, wasn't driving in a way that suggested the driver was looking for a parking spot. No, it was watching us. I could feel it. The baby squirmed on the bench, kicking his legs as Mom tried to fasten his diaper. She didn't notice the SUV at first, but I did, and so did my stepdad. The second time it circled, it came closer. That's when I saw the driver. A man, mid-40s, wearing sunglasses even though it was the middle of the night. His expression was blank. Too blank. He wasn't looking at the store. He wasn't looking at the gas station. He was looking at Mom, at my baby brother. A sick feeling crawled up my spine. Something was wrong. My stepdad didn't hesitate. "Get in the car." Mom looked up, confused. "What?" "Get in the car. Now." His voice had an edge to it, the kind that told her not to argue. She picked up the baby, still confused but moving quickly. That's when the SUV stopped. Not parked. Not idling. Just stopped, right in the middle of the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I couldn't see into the back windows, but something told me someone else was inside. Mom hurried back to the car, climbing into the passenger seat with my brother in her arms. My stepdad wasted no time. He turned the key, the engine roaring to life, and peeled out of the parking lot without looking back. I twisted in my seat, watching through the rear window. The SUV stayed there for a moment, motionless. Then, suddenly, it peeled out after us. My breath caught in my throat. They're following us. My stepdad's grip on the wheel tightened. I know. The road we were on was long and dark, with no streetlights and no signs of civilization for miles. The SUV stayed behind us, its headlights glaring in the mirror, never getting too close but never falling too far behind. They're waiting, I murmured. For what? Mom whispered. I swallowed hard. For us to pull over. For a long time, none of us spoke. We just watched as the SUV tailed us, staying just close enough to remind us that it was there. I thought about the stories I'd heard. The people who disappeared on road trips. The families who were run off the road, only to be found days later, their cars abandoned, their fates unknown. No way. Not us. I glanced at my stepdad. His face was calm, but his hand was still near the glove compartment. If they tried anything, he was ready. The SUV followed us for almost 30 miles. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it veered off onto a side road and disappeared into the night. We didn't stop driving. Not for hours. Not until we reached the next major city, where we finally pulled into a well-lit gas station with security cameras and people. Mom sat in the passenger seat, gripping my baby brother tightly. My stepdad exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Jesus. I checked my phone. No service. If something had happened back there, no one would have known. None of us spoke about it after that. We finished the trip in silence, the road stretching endlessly before us. But even now, years later, I still think about that night. About the way the SUV moved. Like a predator. Like it was waiting for the right moment. And I still wonder, what would have happened if we hadn't noticed in time? We had done this 100 times before. Late night walks were our thing. Me, my cousin Adrian, and his brother Marco. Growing up in Florida, where the nights were humid but quiet, we loved the thrill of sneaking out of the house, wandering the streets when the rest of the neighborhood was asleep. It wasn't about doing anything illegal or dangerous. We just liked the freedom. The feeling of having the whole world to ourselves while everyone else was locked away behind closed doors. That night felt no different. We had been hanging out at Adrian's place, playing video games, when Marco suggested a walk to the gas station a few blocks away. I want a soda, he said, tossing the controller aside. And I don't feel like driving. It was past midnight, but none of us hesitated. We grabbed our shoes and stepped outside, the cool air hitting our skin as we made our way down the quiet, dimly lit streets. The city felt different at night. The streetlights buzzed softly. The occasional car passed, headlights cutting through the darkness before disappearing into the distance. The gas station was about a 20-minute walk away, which wasn't bad, especially since it was our usual spot. At first, everything was normal. We walked, joked around, talked about stupid stuff, girls, work, Adrian's latest failed attempt at growing a beard. Then we made a wrong turn. It wasn't a dramatic mistake. We had taken this route before, but we hadn't realized that some construction had closed off part of the road ahead. Instead of doubling back, we decided to cut through a side street. It was darker, with fewer streetlights, and the houses here looked a little more run down. That's when I felt it. Something was off. The air was too still. I glanced at Adrian. He had the same look on his face, the slight furrow of his brows, the way his eyes darted around the empty street. Marco, always the loud one, was still talking, oblivious. Man, I swear, that lady at the register has a crush on me. Last time, she gave me extra change and winked. Or maybe she was just bad at math, Adrian muttered. I chuckled, but my mind was elsewhere. Something wasn't right. Then, from somewhere in the distance, gunshots. Not close, not far. 3 quick pops, then silence. We froze. Marco was the first to break the silence. Yo, was that? Yeah, I said, my voice low. The air felt different now. Heavy. A car engine rumbled in the distance. We turned our heads just as a pair of headlights appeared at the end of the street. A black SUV. It was driving slow. Too slow. My stomach twisted. It could have been nothing. Just a car passing through. But after hearing gunshots, after walking into a neighborhood that already felt wrong, this wasn't nothing. I nudged Adrian. Let's go. He nodded. Marco, finally sensing our unease, frowned. We're good, right? Just walk, I muttered. Act normal. We kept moving, our pace steady but slightly faster than before. The SUV rolled past us, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. We didn't look at it, didn't acknowledge it, but I felt the weight of unseen eyes watching us. The car didn't stop. It just kept moving down the street, disappearing around a corner. For a second, I let out a breath of relief. Then we turned another corner, and the SUV was there, waiting. My pulse spiked. This was bad. Marco whispered, "What the hell?" Adrian kept his voice low. "Don't stop. Just keep walking." We moved faster now. The gas station wasn't far. If we could just make it there. The SUV's engine growled. Then, it lurched forward. I didn't think. I just ran. The others were right behind me, our footsteps pounding against the pavement as the SUV accelerated. A window rolled down. A voice shouted, "HEY." I didn't look back. We sprinted toward the gas station, our breath coming in ragged gasps. The fluorescent lights of the station glowed in the distance, a beacon of safety. We were close. So close. Then, a door slammed open behind us. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Someone was chasing us. I risked a glance over my shoulder. A man had jumped out of the SUV. He was sprinting after us, his hand reaching toward his waistband. A gun. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning as we tore through the gas station parking lot and barreled inside. The cashier, a young woman in her early 20s, looked up, startled. "Call the cops," Adrian gasped. The moment the words left his mouth, the SUV peeled away, tires screeching as it vanished into the night. The man chasing us? Gone. It was as if he had never been there. We stood there, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs. The cashier looked at us, confused. What happened? We exchanged glances, still trying to process it. But we knew. We had almost been robbed. Or worse. Later, after catching our breath, we walked home, sticking to the main roads this time, under the glow of streetlights. We never went on another late-night walk again. We had been on the road for hours when we finally pulled up to our Airbnb for the night. It wasn't a hotel, but that was the whole point. My girlfriend, Melissa, and I wanted something different, something quaint and off the beaten path. We were on a cross-country road trip, trying to avoid the usual tourist traps and overpriced hotels. Staying in people's ghost houses, little cabins, and weird rental spots was part of the adventure. When we booked this place, it had seemed perfect. Charming little camper in a quiet countryside setting, the listing had read, "Private and peaceful, perfect for couples looking for a cozy stay." The pictures had shown a small but well-kept caravan tucked into the corner of someone's spacious backyard. The reviews were good, and the price was right, so we booked it without a second thought. Now, standing in front of it, I wasn't so sure. The photos had made it look brighter, more welcoming. In person, the camper was smaller than I expected, old and weathered, its once white paint now a dull gray from years of sun exposure. The property itself was huge acres of open land, stretching out behind a two-story farmhouse that sat dark and quiet at the other end of the yard. There were no other houses in sight, no streetlights, no cars passing by, just us. In the vast, empty night, Melissa shivered. "This place feels creepy." I forced a grin. "Come on, it's just a little rundown. I bet it looks beher in the daylight." She didn't seem convinced, but she followed me as we climbed up the short set of metal steps and unlocked the door. The inside was cozy, at least. A small bed, a tiny kitchenette, and a little table by the window. The air smelled slightly musty, but it wasn't unbearable. "See," I said, "it's not so bad." Melissa sighed and dropped onto the bed. "I guess." I turned on my phone's flashlight and shined it through the window. Outside, the farmhouse sat in silence, its windows dark. The owner had messaged earlier, saying they wouldn't be home tonight, but that we could text them if we needed anything. We were completely alone out here. I didn't know why, but that fact made my stomach feel weird. Melissa was already curling up under the blankets, and I decided I was probably just tired. I locked the door, switched off the lights, and climbed into bed beside her. At some point, I must have drifted off. Then something woke me up. I wasn't sure what at first. Just a noise. A soft shuffling sound. I opened my eyes to pitch darkness. The air inside the camper was still and silent, but outside, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was walking around the camper. My heart started pounding. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps circled the camper once. Then again. Melissa stirred beside me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, barely breathing. We stayed frozen, listening. Then, a soft tap on the camper door. A single, deliberate knock. My blood turned to ice. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and checked the time. 3:12 a.m. Who the hell would be knocking at our door in the middle of the night? Melissa clutched my arm. What do we do? I didn't know. Then, a voice. "Hey," a man called from outside. "Y'all okay in there?" The voice was deep, casual, but something about it made my skin crawl. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, we're fine." Silence. Then the man chuckled softly. "You sure about that?" Melissa gripped my hand so tight it hurt. Something wasn't right. I swallowed hard and forced my voice to stay firm. "Yeah, we're fine." "Who are you?" No response. The footsteps moved again, circling around the camper, slower this time. I could feel the tension in the air. Then, the handle of the door rattled. Melissa let out a small gasp. I shot up, reaching for the nearest object, my backpack, and clutched it like it would do anything against whoever was outside. The handle rattled again. Then the voice spoke, quieter this time. "Come on now," the man murmured. "Ain't no need to be scared." Melissa squeezed my arm so hard I thought she might bruise me. I wasn't thinking anymore, just reacting. I grabbed my phone and dialed the Airbnb host's number. It rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. I tried again. Nothing. Then, from outside, a second voice. A different man. "Is it locked?" My blood ran cold. Melissa shook her head violently, her lips pressed tight together. The first man let out a small sigh. "Yeah," he muttered. "It's locked." My heart nearly stopped. Then, without another word, footsteps. They walked away, slowly, casually, as if they weren't in any kind of hurry. We didn't move. We just listened as the footsteps faded into the distance. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to check the window. No one was there. But then, a shadow. I could barely make it out, standing near the farmhouse, just beyond the glow of the porch light. A man, standing completely still, watching. I yanked the curtains closed and turned to Melissa. "We're leaving." She didn't argue. We grabbed our things in record time, shoving clothes into our bags without even bothering to fold them. I flung the door open, scanning the yard. No one in sight, but that didn't mean they weren't there. We ran to the car, threw our bags inside, and peeled out of the driveway so fast the tires kicked up gravel. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone running after us. But we didn't see anything. We drove for an hour before stopping at a gas station, still shaken, barely speaking. I checked my phone again. One missed call. From the Airbnb host. I called back immediately. The moment they answered, I blurted out, "Who the hell was at your place last night?" A pause. Then, "What do you mean?" I clenched my jaw. There were men outside the camper. They tried to get in. Silence. Then the host sighed. "Damn it," they muttered. My stomach dropped. "What?" "I had a break-in earlier tonight," they admitted. "Someone busted in through my back door while I was out. I just got back now." A cold chill ran through me. The men outside. They hadn't been after us. Not originally. They had broken into the host's house. And when they saw the camper, they had decided to see if there was anything else worth taking. Or worse. We never got a refund. And we didn't care. We just kept driving, putting as much distance as possible between us and that place. We never stayed in an Airbnb again. It was supposed to be a peaceful afternoon. We had been traveling through Europe for nearly 3 weeks now, hopping from city to city, country to country, and I had loved every second of it. But there was something exhausting about constantly being with my family, my mom, dad, and younger sister day in and day out. I needed a break, even if just for an hour. So when we arrived in Madrid, I told them I wanted some time to myself. Just a coffee break, I reassured them. "I'll meet you guys back at the hotel." My dad hesitated, but ultimately agreed. "Text me when you get there," he said, giving me the usual concerned parent speech. "And be careful, all right?" I promised I would. That's how I ended up at a small cafe tucked between 2 narrow buildings on a quiet street, just a few blocks from the city center. It was the kind of cafe that felt like a hidden gem, tiny tables, the rich scent of espresso in the air, and locals chatting in low voices. A place where time seemed to slow down. I ordered a cappuccino, found a seat near the window, and pulled out my book. For the first time in weeks, I finally felt like I could breathe. Then I felt it. That strange prickle at the back of my neck. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. At first, I ignored it, chalking it up to paranoia. I was alone in a foreign country, of course, I was on high alert. But after a few minutes, the feeling didn't go away. I glanced up casually, pretending to look around the cafe. That's when I saw him. A man, sitting at a small table near the entrance. He was staring directly at me. I immediately looked back down at my book, pretending I hadn't noticed, but my pulse quickened. Maybe he wasn't actually staring. Maybe I had just caught him mid-thought, his gaze unfocused. But something in my gut told me otherwise. I forced myself to focus on my book, but I wasn't reading anymore. My eyes flicked up once more, just for a second. He was still staring. No phone in his hands. No book. No food or coffee in front of him. Just sitting there, watching. My stomach twisted. I looked away, trying to ignore the growing unease creeping up my spine. I took a sip of my coffee, pulled my phone out, and pretended to be occupied. Maybe he would lose interest. But after a few more minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to move. I decided to go to the restroom, giving myself an excuse to get up and break eye contact. I pushed back my chair and walked toward the back of the cafe where the bathrooms were located. As I passed his table, I felt his eyes following me. A cold shiver ran through me. I stepped into the small, dimly lit bathroom and locked the door behind me. I took a deep breath. You're being paranoid, I told myself. It's probably nothing. But my gut told me otherwise. Then, a noise. Soft shuffling. Someone was outside the door. I held my breath, my ears straining. A moment of silence. Then, a single knock. Not loud, not impatient. Just testing. My heart slammed against my ribs. I stayed completely still, my hand hovering over my phone, ready to dial my dad's number. Then, footsteps. Walking away. I waited, counted to 10, then 20. Finally, I unlocked the door and eased it open. The hallway was empty. I stepped out cautiously, scanning the cafe. The man was gone. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived, because when I turned toward the exit, he was outside the cafe, standing on the sidewalk, waiting. A heavy weight settled in my chest. He wasn't pretending to look at his phone. He wasn't walking away. He was just there, staring through the window at me. I felt trapped. I could go back to my table, but what then? Sit there and wait for him to leave? He clearly wasn't in a hurry. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my bag, forced myself to walk toward the door, and stepped outside. The man didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched. I turned onto the sidewalk, walking quickly in the direction of my hotel. For a few moments, I thought maybe it was over. Then I heard footsteps. Close, matching my pace. I didn't look back. I sped up. The footsteps sped up too. A chill ran down my spine. I turned a corner, my mind racing. I needed to get to a busy street, somewhere with people. The problem was, this part of the city wasn't as lively as the tourist-heavy areas. There were fewer pedestrians, fewer shops still open. I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was still following me, close enough that I could see his face. He wasn't hiding it anymore. I forced myself to stay calm. Think. I spotted a small clothing store with bright lights spilling onto the street. I veered toward it, stepping inside without hesitation. The moment I was in, I darted between the racks of clothes, moving toward the back of the store. I waited. Minutes passed. Then, through the glass storefront, I saw him walk by. Slower this time, scanning the street, looking for me. I held my breath. Then, he turned and disappeared around the corner. I waited another 5 minutes before leaving the store. This time, I took a different route back to the hotel, sticking to well-lit areas, my pulse racing the entire way. I didn't stop looking over my shoulder until I was safely inside my room. I locked the door behind me, my hands still shaking. I had never felt such pure, raw fear in my life. I never saw him again, but I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed him? What if I had taken a quieter street? Or worse, what if I had gone straight back to my hotel and led him right to where I was staying? I'll never know, and I don't want to know. My mother never liked stopping at rest areas. She always said they felt off, too empty, too exposed, too full of strangers coming and going. It wasn't like gas stations, where there were attendants, cameras, and bright lights. Rest stops were different. Remote. Isolated. The kind of places where, if something bad happened, it might take hours before anyone noticed. That's why, whenever we went on road trips, she avoided them at all costs. But that night, she didn't have a choice. We had been driving for hours, cutting through the middle of nowhere. Just miles of highway stretching endlessly into the darkness, flanked by forests on either side. My dad wasn't with us, it was just me and my mom. And she had to use the bathroom. I remember the way she hesitated when she saw the sign. Rest area, 2 miles. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. "Mom, just stop," I said from the passenger seat. "It's fine." She didn't answer right away, just kept her eyes on the road. Then, finally, she sighed. "All right, but stay in the car. Keep the doors locked." I rolled my eyes. Yeah. We pulled into the rest stop, and immediately, I understood why she hated them. It was empty. Completely, utterly empty. No cars. No truckers taking a nap in their rigs. No families stretching their legs. Just the two of us. In the building, sitting under flickering yellow lights, buzzing weakly against the night. My mom parked close to the entrance. "I'll be quick," she said. I nodded and watched as she stepped out of the car and walked inside. For a few minutes, everything was fine. I leaned back in my seat, scrolling through my phone, the soft hum of the car engine the only sound. Then I noticed something. Movement. From the corner of my eye, near the side of the building. A shadow. At first, I thought it was my mom, but no, she had gone through the front entrance. The shadow was moving along the side of the building. Slow. Careful. Like it didn't want to be seen. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I sat up straighter, my heartbeat picking up. The shadow disappeared around the corner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, my mom stepped out of the building. And something was wrong. She wasn't walking normally. She was rushing toward the car, her movement stiff, like she was trying not to run. And then I saw him. A man stepped out of the shadows behind her. Gray hair. Disheveled clothes. A grin stretched across his face. He was watching her. Following her. My mom reached the car and ripped the driver's side door open. "Lock the doors," she said sharply. "Now." My hands fumbled for the lock. I hit the button just as she slammed her own door shut, her breath coming fast. She shoved the key into the ignition, turned it. The car roared to life. The man stepped closer. His grin widened. Then, he lunged at the hood of the car, slamming his hands down on the metal. I screamed. My mom gunned it. The car lurched forward, and the man stumbled back, barely avoiding getting hit. We peeled out of the rest stop, gravel kicking up behind us. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Just the sound of the tires against the pavement, the night stretching endlessly ahead. Finally, I found my voice. "Mom, what the hell just happened?" She didn't answer right away. Her hands were shaking. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "He was waiting." My stomach dropped. "What?" She exhaled sharply. When I went into the bathroom, it was empty. But as soon as I was inside, I heard the door open. A lump formed in my throat. "I thought it was just another woman," she continued, until I heard his voice. I swallowed. "What did he say?" She gripped the wheel tighter. At first, just weird, mumbling stuff. Asking if I was traveling alone. I felt my blood run cold. He started getting closer, she went on. Kept saying I looked nice, and then he was looking for a ride. My hands clenched into fists. I tried to ignore him, she said, shaking her head. But then he got closer. Too close. He stood in front of the door like he was trying to block me from leaving. She took a deep breath. So I lied. I said my husband was outside waiting for me. I exhaled slowly. Did that stop him? She shook her head. No. He just smiled. And said, "Hey." She hesitated. I stared at her. Said what? She swallowed hard. He said. "No, he's not." My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. He knew, she whispered. Somehow he knew. I felt sick. She kept talking. That's when I shoved past him and ran out. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. And when I got to the car, I realized, she trailed off. What? I pressed. She licked her lips. There was another man, she murmured, standing at the other side of the building. Watching. Waiting. I stared at her, my body numb. It hadn't just been one man. It had been two. I turned, glancing out the back window. The rest stop was long gone, swallowed by the darkness. But my mind wouldn't stop racing. What if you hadn't gotten away? I whispered. My mom didn't answer. She didn't have to. We both knew the answer. We never stopped at a rest area again.